Hi again, it's Greg. I'm here to in San Francisco to protest Twitter's silencing of conservatives. And as you can see, there's Twitter headquarters. Not sure if you can see that marquee up there. We're on Market Street in San Francisco, and I'm here to point out some of the problems at Twitter from the conservative perspective. Let me put my glasses down here. So I went to UC Berkeley in college, and just down the way over the Bay Bridge. Radical school, still is. But Berkeley in the 60s was the home of the free speech movement. And that was really what the liberal community found that of value. And today, conservatives find it of value. But the progressives don't seem to want to accept free speech anymore. And the way they do it is they hide behind phrases such as hate speech or misinformation or public safety risks, okay? But what they're really doing is taking something we all agree with and positioning it for what it shouldn't be, and that's a disguised form of censorship. So I'm here to kind of point out a few things about Twitter that maybe you haven't heard about. And I'll give you 3 examples. And by the way, Twitter is probably the biggest violator of censorship in the big tech world. It's highly progressive. It itself sits in the most progressive city probably in the United States, other than maybe New York City. Without a doubt, it's extremely biased in favor of progressive ideals, sadly. So let me and let me just follow that with that Twitter kind of gets away with this because they are still legally considered a platform, internet platform. So they're protected by Section 230 laws, and you cannot sue them for slander. But that needs to change, and companies like Facebook, Twitter, and Google need to be reclassified as publishers, just like the New York Times, just like the Wall Street Journal, that are exposed then to legal action for content that they put onto their platforms. So let me give you 3 examples of some of these abuses, and I'll give you a little better view of things. And here's my little protest sign, of course, that follows me around and drives everyone crazy. Especially around here. Okay, stop silencing conservatives. Okay, so first example, recent tweets by Donald Trump concerning mail-in ballot fraud and the risk of running a national election using mail-in ballots. So he tweets that, backed by New York Times own reports about lost mail-in ballots, fraud in some of these primaries that went on. Instinctually, I think everyone knows that there's greater risk of fraud in mail-in balloting than individuals going to the booth with their mask, standing 6 feet apart, and voting that way. President Obama certainly can hold a funeral speech in a full church of 1,000 people who aren't social distancing, and that all seems to be okay. But it's not right for people to line up like we normally do at a polling booth, and the only difference is we're wearing a mask and we're socially distancing. I don't get it. So in any case, Trump tweets this out, and the first thing that Twitter does is they do a fact check. So when you click on the fact check, they provide a link. They provide a link to a CNN site that disputes this claim, and who claims that mail-in voting is not prone to fraud in the least. So that's a nice, independent fact check, right? So who do they have fact checking? And that's a real danger. So it's obvious that they're using their own propaganda to fact check Trump, and to discount everything he has to say that differs from what they want to say. In fact, when Trump agrees with them, they'll even argue that. So the second example I have is Trump's walk through Lafayette Park in Washington, D.C. That happened sort of early in the rioting in Washington, D.C., when St. John's Church was burned, a portion of it. And so Trump walked through this park. He was guarded, obviously, by Secret Service, police, walked through the park, stood in front of the church, and raised the Bible. And that drove the left crazy. So immediately, and by the way, there were wafts of colored smoke in the vicinity of Lafayette Park. So the claim then by Biden, Pelosi, and Schumer, who went on Twitter, was that these peaceful protesters were tear gassed. And the problem with that was that Twitter never fact checked it. And only later did the U.S. Parks Police tell the truth. They spoke out and said tear gas was not used. And also, the peaceful protesters were throwing projectiles at them. Get my sign in there occasionally. Okay? Big building, Twitter. Okay, so it's a double standard. Trump gets fact-checked. Democratic leadership does not get fact-checked. Okay? Thirdly, let's look at the recent Frontline Doctors Conference. Okay, this has gotten a lot of news coverage. So these frontline doctors talked about hydrochloroquine and how safe it was to use and how effective it was. The left could not stand something like that to ever happen. They want the lockdown, right? At least until the election is over. So they disputed it, and they called these people quacks, etc. And their gold standard for misinformation and public safety was none other than the World Health Organization. Well, the problem with the World Health Organization is they're a bunch of liars. Even recently, the World Health Organization has come clean and said China never notified them of the coronavirus spread. And they also advised us that the coronavirus was not transmittable, through human-to-human contact. So we're supposed to use them as our gold standard somehow for saying that these frontline doctors are not giving us correct information. So Twitter defines these gold standards then in the way that is convenient for the left and their narrative. So who should we believe? Should we believe the CDC, who we know has been lying and who colludes with the Chinese government? which is a fact? Or should we believe the CDC that ran a study on hydrochloroquine on AIDS patients that didn't work? People who were already with AIDS? Or should we believe frontline doctors? Or we should believe the Henry Ford medical system or health system that on July 2nd has claimed 19 patients using hydrochloroquine survived. And it actually worked on them. It actually helps people. Okay? But Twitter's not going to have any of that. They want this thing locked down. They want society to be locked down. They want the economy to crash. They want to wait till Bill Gates comes out with his vaccine. The same guy who tested vaccines in India on polio and Africa on COVID and paralyzed Indian children and killed African children. So Twitter wants us to kind of follow what Bill Gates has to tell us about vaccines. The guy who created all those bugs in Windows. Okay? So my sign, you notice, is down. So someone came by and knocked it down, of course. The tolerant left at work. Now it's back up again. Okay, so as an American, I would pretty much figure that the more information you have about something that no one completely understands yet, and there's no vaccine for, well, all the options should go on the table and shouldn't be labeled as misinformation or public safety. Is that wrong? Or aren't we intelligent enough to look at different views and gather information ourselves and do our own analysis? It's not like everybody's going to go running out to get some hydrochloroquine. Isn't it require a prescription? Aren't there doctors who stand as a barrier for misuse of this drug? Just because there are no doctors standing as a barrier to the misuse of the vaccines that Bill Gates wanted to test. But that wasn't talked about. So it's really sad what's going on with big tech. And it's really sad that the free speech movement that was started at UC Berkeley in the 60s is dead. It's dead in these progressive cities. They want to tell you it's alive because people are out there speaking their minds, right? But they're speaking their minds of a certain side. And if you come to San Francisco, you're going to see your sign knocked over by someone passing by when I'm not looking. So it's what this world has come to. I'm also going to post a short video on when I parked a block away from this Twitter building. In one of the side streets, there were 5 homeless tents. And very sad conditions for these people who live there. Is that who Twitter's trying to speak out for by censoring conservatives? Sometimes you have to ask yourself, politics aside, what's right and what's wrong? And do we want to protect the speech that is a core principle of our Bill of Rights and our Constitution? Because one day, there's going to be another majority that doesn't like what you have to say. And they'll silence you. And Black Lives Matter is already doing that. And the progressives and the virtue signalers are telling you what you can say and what you can't. And if you don't, you'll lose your job or you'll get assaulted. And these are the same people who want to burn down the system and replace it with some sort of Marxist utopia. But I've lived in a communist country before. I lived in Poland in the early 80s. They don't like it. And if you talk to Swedes, which is the gold standard for socialism, even the low income are severely taxed by that system. And they run a hybrid socialism. They're capitalist socialist country. Okay? And maybe that's something that we can all agree on if necessary. But I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about censorship from big tech companies of conservative ideas. And you're all affected by this. Not just me, not just, Trump or Trump Jr., who was basically canceled completely off of the Twitter platform. Really? For tweeting Frontline Doctors Conference link? Is that what this world of progressive ideals is all about? Where you tell us who we can listen to for medical advice? Your one-sided viewpoint? And anything that Trump might say or refer to is wrong and dangerous. You guys got it all wrong, and you're going to lose. In the end, you're just trying to get the suckers, the Americans who don't follow politics, to gloss over everything, who don't have the time to spend digging into the real truth. And we provide the truth at least a hell of a lot more than you do. Go to some of these. You don't have to go to Fox. Go to these bloggers, these podcast guys, these conservatives, Timcast, Salty Cracker, Will Smith. There's a lot of black conservatives out there you will also find. And they're gaining their voice. And they're certainly going to start considering leaving the Democrat Party because they're not helping the black community. Black Lives Matter doesn't help the black community. They have an agenda. And if I started a movement called Chinese Lives Matter, but behind it all, I really want to overthrow the government. I really want to divide races, segregate races, have my own little systems within a system, and you disagree with me, well, I'll attack you. I'll say, you mean Chinese lives don't matter to you? And that's how that movement is being used and how it's being manipulated by the Democrats. If you give money to Black Lives Matter, much of that money goes straight to Democratic candidates. Follow it up. I'm not making it up. It's being funneled to Biden campaign, campaigns of others. It's just a Democrat front. It's all a front. So I know I'm gonna get people upset, but who am I? I'm just a little voice on the street. I'm a nobody. But I do represent a lot of people out there. All my brothers and sisters in conservative areas across the United States who don't speak out, who don't use technology, who just want to go to work, live their lives, and try to enjoy their lives. And you send jobs overseas, you work with China, you try to make things cheap. And a lot of people make money who are involved in all that. But at the same time, American workers are losing their jobs because of you, because you don't care about them. Okay, so again, it's hard not to jump in all the issues, but the main message is right here that I have for Twitter. So try not to be too obvious with your censorship. And thank you for turning on your fact checking during the election year, which is odd, isn't it? Turning on fact check on Trump during an election year, and rarely fact checking anybody else. So that's the world we live in. I'm sorry, but it is. All right, that's my stay in San Francisco. Glad you can hang out with me. I think I'm gonna have to go to Apple next. Apple, it's a bad boy. Silicon Valley bad boy. Okay, and by the way, any protests I do here, Twitter, Google, Netflix, Facebook, these guys will never hire me, ever. So I'm burning bridges, as they say. But I'm burning bridges for you out in America, and for those who value their free speech. Okay, signing off.